Michelle. It's good to see you.
Hi, Ariel. Thanks for having me.
Okay, great. Well, really excited to have you today. I want to learn more about your journey of starting Medable, how you came up with the idea, how did it lead to decentralized clinical trials, how did you have the vision that decentralized clinical trials was going to take over the world and become such a big thing? And so I want to know where that vision came from and how you predicted that. Any other predictions that you have around clinical trial innovation, because you were spot on there. And just really excited to learn from you. I mean, Medable is an incredible business, and there's a lot to learn from in so many different aspects to it. Building a business is hard, as we were just chatting about, and so there's a lot to learn of. And so I just want to start with, could you share with me the journey for starting Medable? Where'd you get the idea? How'd you go from idea to product, first hire, first customer, first investor? Like, share the founding story. We'd love to learn it.
Sure. Thanks, Ariel. So I think it was probably in medical school that I started to identify this incredible access gap that existed. So I was in medical school at the University of New Mexico, and it was such an incredible place to train because we served so many underserved patients from really, not only our state, but from Mexico. And people would come from almost all over the world to New Mexico for a variety of reasons. And in that academic center, one of the core kind of values and principles was to provide care for anyone who came to the door. And so it was so important to be able to provide excellent care. And all of the physicians and the clinical staff were very aligned in the quality of care that was being provided. But it just became so evident that if you didn't make it to the University of New Mexico, how were you going to receive care? So I started to think about the technology opportunity to provide a bridge between patients and the broader healthcare system. Fast forward, say 2 years, and I'm at Stanford doing my residency in dermatology, and it's a very different ecosystem. What I would see, I would say in New Mexico, were primary presentations of infectious diseases you just rarely saw, and at Stanford, I would see the oncology patient with 3 different types of cancers, like very rare presentations of advanced illness, but they weren't as much on the underserved side. It was more on the referral center. Patients were coming in for diseases that really couldn't be treated anywhere else. And the same problem was true, that it was really about access, that patients, if they weren't able to get to Stanford, their outcomes could be very different. If they were unable to make it to one of these referral centers where you had physicians who really specialize in some of the rarest of the rare clinical presentations and clinical conditions. So technology, again, I felt like could be an incredible bridge for patients. My particular area of interest was in rare disease, in a disease called systemic sclerosis. So this is an autoimmune disease. It affects women 9 to 1. And I had this incredible opportunity to work in a clinic that specialized in the care of systemic sclerosis patients with pulmonologists, rheumatologists, dermatologists. And we were both caring for patients and researching what types of therapies, which were already approved, would be effective for this disease, even though the therapies in most cases hadn't been approved for that condition. And I was researching the genetics and epigenetics of the disease as well. And my particular research was in identical twins. So I was on the clinical care side, also on the research side, and I was looking for twin pairs with this disease. And immediately I realized, wow, conducting research is so difficult because here we are with, whoever can make it to Stanford. These patients are extremely rare all over the world. And not only was I researching a rare disease, they were the rarest of the rare, being twin pairs. So this very clear picture came to my mind of what this technology needed to be. At the same time, I'm in Silicon Valley, and the Apple App Store is revolutionizing the way we live our lives day to day, from banking to video games to, you name it, getting a ride somewhere. And I thought, mobile is a new way for the internet to provide access that's far outside of the home. It's really paired with the human person. The person themselves can go anywhere, hence the name mobile. So I envisioned a solution that would leverage mobile and connect with patients, but be able to also have all of the security, data privacy that was needed to deliver healthcare. And that was really where the idea from Medable came. And it was about both research and clinical care, connecting patients in with their individual lives to the healthcare ecosystem. And what I realized as it got off the ground and I was working in my research in systemic sclerosis was that research was this incredible unmet need, not only from an access perspective, but also from a data perspective. So when I was, sequencing the epigenome, I needed more data than I could essentially have by just sporadically seeing patients in clinic. It would be so much better if I understood the context of their daily lives, their environment. What we know about the epigenome is it's changing all of the time, and it's very much driven by the environment which we live in. So to have this contextual data on my systemic sclerosis research, twin pairs who may be living in different cities under different environments, and being able to leverage that connectivity through mobile, it seemed that we could advance research significantly. And, I also saw many companies at the time getting back that I felt like, hey, if they could do it, I could do it. This is actually one of my foundational principles of entrepreneurship. If someone else can do it, you can do it too. It takes a little bit of proving that to yourself, but I really believe that. And there was at the time this company, Yo, and it would send this text that would just say Yo. And I remember Mark Andreessen was like, this is the beginning of the 2-bit revolution. And I'm like, okay, maybe, but there's also a whole host of really important other problems that I think would change the future to a far greater degree. So I just kind of went for it and started to figure out how to raise money, how to build a pitch deck. I knew nothing, but I did figure it out over the years.
That's an amazing story. So that I didn't know that, by the way. That's an amazing founding story and different life events leading to that aha moment. Tell me about how'd you make your first hire? What was the first hire like? It was did you have money did you raise money beforehand? Did you hire when did you hire, raise money? Tell me all about that.
So I was running through the Stanford campus and there was this pitch contest. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go and do my pitch contest and maybe I'll receive win a little bit of money. So I won $15,000 in this pitch contest. And I started to, go onto LinkedIn and try to hire engineers who could help me build this app. Anyhow, I ended up contracting one of my very first engineers, and he helped me build a prototype that I could then demo to pitch investors. Over the course of about the first year, through a confluence of different connections, whether it was sitting at a bar in Silicon Valley or the entrepreneur network, I was able to connect with 3 people who were really critical to the success of Medable. First was a platform technologist and cloud expert who had built some of the largest enterprise solutions for healthcare. Another was a mobile app developer who had built the first app for the Apple App Store for Farmville. And then the third was an enterprise architect and data architect who just was amazing. And all of these people actually still are the co-founders of the company, and we still work together to build the company. But it was really, I would say, this DNA of both healthcare and technology, cloud and mobile and data that needed to come together to build the solution. I think I'm kind of the front woman, but my co-founders are absolutely critical to our ability to have actually provided a solution in the market and to continue to evolve that solution. And funny enough, the first contractor that I ever hired on LinkedIn with that $15,000, at that time, I couldn't hire him full time, but fast forward 4 years, he applied for Medable full time. And now he's one of our team members on the engineering side full time. So it's pretty cool to see how it all comes together. But there was no one who said, do it this way. I sent tweets. I got on LinkedIn. I met people who knew people. There were companies that were going under and people would say, hey, can you just employ this person for a couple months? And then they would enter my payroll and the other company wouldn't survive and they'd become a member of the team. So I think the takeaway is you just have to be really scrappy and continue to just make sure you see where the talent that you need is and how to connect with those people.
That's an amazing story. You probably felt super rich after the first $15,000. I know the feeling.
Well, yeah, it's funny because I didn't pay myself for years, but to your point, once you have someone whose livelihood you're responsible for, there's so much pressure to just continue to figure out how to pay your team members because, they've got families and mortgages. And I think that interestingly was as a big of a driver in the early days is the mission was just being able to take care of the people who trusted me and make sure that I could, keep them employed.
That's funny. Early days of H1, I would be payroll to payroll with my co-founder. We would joke, I guess no
Wow.
payroll this week. And I know the feeling, and it's only the early days startups you feel that. So it was, what the interesting point is, you didn't mention anyone from pharma. You were a physician.
Yeah.
How did you learn about pharma? How'd you get that first customer? Like, how'd you do that?
So I was presenting at a foundation medicine event in San Diego, and there were a number of people from pharma in the audience, and we were demoing our product. And one of our early partners came up and said, "This is amazing. This could change the way we do drug trials." And I had always wanted to support interventional research and investigational drug development, but I didn't think of it from the shoes of the pharma company in the early days. I thought about it from the shoes of the researcher, of the principal investigator, really from the lens of where I was sitting at Stanford, and we were using off-label drugs and doing research to understand if those drugs were effective for new diseases. So we ended up getting our first customer contract with this pharma company. And it was just so eye-opening. One, all of the things that we needed to be able to do that we didn't at that point in time do. And also just the size of the opportunity, because what was so exciting, I think, about pharmaceutical drug development is it's one of the only kind of global payers of healthcare in a sense. When you think about pharma trials, there's one payer, the pharmaceutical company, for a global effort to standardize healthcare for the subset of patients who are in that clinical trial. And what I found as an entrepreneur interfacing with the American healthcare system is you don't have that level of aligned incentives because you've got the payers, the academic or the health centers, like the incentives are so fractured. It's hard to build a solution that will scale from a business model perspective and will scale from a patient value perspective. So I actually found that life sciences and pharmaceutical companies are aligned in both the patient value delivery and the way that they're able to unify the incentives across all the stakeholders who are involved in providing that value to the patient. And it actually made our lives a lot easier in many ways to do what we had wanted to do from the very beginning.
I didn't realize that. So when I guess it makes sense, you built Medable to solve your problem at Stanford. You didn't
Right.
build it for pharma companies to solve their problem, which was the same problem in the end, but you didn't build it for pharma. Uh, I didn't realize that at all. Are
Yeah.
most of your users today physicians not doing clinical studies, or most of your users are people working on clinical trials?
So this was, I would say, in 2017. And so then once we started working with pharma, we globalized the platform. We understood that aligning with the pharmaceutical companies and drug development would align how we could execute for patients all over the world. So today, actually, our only customers are pharmaceutical companies from a buyer's perspective, but we run our software in over 12,000 clinics worldwide.
Wow.
And so we still have a huge number of physicians who use our technology, but our business model is to support investigational research largely for investigational drug development.
Can you explain to people a decentralized clinical trial, and also explain to me how you predicted the future that was going to be like a thing? You basically created a category, basically for pharma companies, and I would love to know if you knew it was going to be this big, um, and I could first explain what it is to folks that don't know what it is, and then I'd love to learn how you knew it would be this big, or if you did or didn't.
Well, that's, I think at the time, and I'm sure this has been your experience as an entrepreneur, you have a real passion for a specific problem. So the problem that I feel like it's worth investing my life's work and I get out of bed every day so excited to solve is how we provide access to patients for research. And essentially what I saw was this vector of mobile. Mobile was going to change how people accessed everything, and that data was going to be able to be something that was far greater than these sporadic clinical visits. So the bet I made was research would become a consumer scale opportunity. And this was, from the lens of an independent investigator, an individual investigator at Stanford. But I think I was very much in the shoes of anyone who needed to solve hard research problems. At that point in time, decentralized clinical trials weren't really a thing. It was more about patient-centered research and being able to deliver research at consumer scale. But I think that probably the early insights were the same things that led to decentralized clinical trials being a well-recognized category, which was that we had to provide better access. Patients needed to be seen as consumers. The scale of research needed to be consumer scale, and we really needed to democratize, research participation. So I would say the other insight that I had that I think was really important was enterprise solutions, like the ones I was working in. You could call Epic an enterprise solution. They needed to not just solve for a clinician or clinical staff and user, they needed to solve for the patient as the primary generator of data and the primary recipient of the value. And so that was then, I think, what led us to build an enterprise platform with consumer scale in research and be able to conduct visits remotely, which decentralized clinical trials is basically saying, hey, it's not centered around the site or the clinic, it's centered around the patient. We call it, it's only decentralized from the lens of the clinician, it's centralized from the lens of the patient. And so those insights about the technology gap and the value gap and the gap for patients really then over time proved out to be the direction that things were going. And I think this is probably true of so many entrepreneurs. Like I would love, for your story to understand it, but you have to see a gap from the first hand and believe that the future will look very different than the present and build that future and make it so. And I think for us, it was really about, consumer scale investigational research and decentralized trials. I hope that answers your question.
That does. The thing that I'm curious about, and you were in the driver's seat the whole time, did you guys create this category? Or this category was being created and you just got there at the right time? Or was this trend happening? Or I couldn't tell if you guys created this trend or not, or you made this trend possible. Like, what's your read on it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say we were part of what created the category. I think in order to create a category, there's a number of different, aspects of what needs to be true. One, the world needs to actually need it. And I think the pandemic created a set of circumstances that required this type of technology. The other thing is that for a category to be created, you need the technologies that support it, and then you need the companies that see the opportunity and build that business. And so, I think that we were foundational to the category being created. I think we were foundational for going from an edge case to a main case. And I think now, as decentralized clinical trials actually become a standard part of clinical trials and how we capture clinical data, I think we will be foundational to what the future of it also looks like. But I wouldn't say that we could take credit for it by any
Okay.
means. But I think we were one of the core ingredients to the category really having legs. And in a scenario like the pandemic, for the technology to be able to be available and scale the way that it did, and to really show the value and to prove the thesis that this will provide new ways of access, better access, in certain circumstances, the only form of access. And I think we were pretty critical to solving that problem.
The thing that I always admired was your brand. When someone thinks about a decentralized clinical trial, they think of you. They think of Medable.
Thank you.
How did you do that? Did you just spend $1 kajillion on marketing, or was that you have an amazing marketing person? I'm just actually curious. I know other entrepreneurs are probably curious too. I'm personally want to know, like, how'd you make that? How'd you get the brand to be so synonymous with the category?
There wasn't any one thing. I think as a person, I really believe in the power of a brand. So here's what I think is so powerful about a brand. And, Elon says that Tesla doesn't market, but they have a brand that people want to be associated with. So, the power of a brand is that it has a subconscious alignment with the target audience. And it means that it represents the things that people want to individually identify with. And I think in our ecosystem, we've built a brand that is, I hope, aligned with innovation and a true commitment to bettering patient lives. Our brand was never something that we're like, we're going to build this great brand. But the values it represented were always so important to me. And the way we showed up in the world is a differentiated idea and experience was also very important to me because I thought it was our opportunity to show people something about the future, like what we really stood for. And so it's interesting that you say that. We get a lot of positive feedback on the brand. Today, we have an incredible brand marketing team, and they, it's not a massive amount of dollars. Nothing is, I think, in this economy, but they really try to deliver to the world an expression of the future that is about access to clinical research, that is about speeding up clinical development timelines, that is about actually improving human health. That is very powerful. But it wasn't something we ever were like, we're going to build this great brand. I think it's just the authenticity of what our team stands for and expressed in a way that all along the way we had someone awesome kind of building that front door, I suppose.
Got it. And the early days, it was you were telling the story mostly to the world because that early
Yeah,
days,
totally. And I
amazing.
remember, I think in some senses, as like a dermatologist and a person who loves aesthetics, I always wanted it to be visually appealing and the way we showed up. And then, I don't think I have many things I would do differently and many things I'm not good at, but I am super dedicated to solving this problem, like in my heart of heart and soul of souls. So I think, that's been one of the strengths that I've been able to bring to the team over time. And I do think it comes across in our brand and is ultimately the passion for the problem.
When it was pre-pandemic, there was no forcing function to force pharma companies to do decentralized clinical trials. Uh, could you explain or share what was it like educating pharma companies on the value of a decentralized clinical trial pre-pandemic uh,
Sure.
compared to post-pandemic?
Yeah. So, I mean, every pharmaceutical company struggles with how to access patients, whether it's from recruitment or once a patient's recruited to retain them. It's essentially like, how do I build a connection initially with this person and maintain that connection? And people saw in our technology something that really would resonate with a consumer. So, one, it was being able to provide access for people and patients who would otherwise not have access, and two, provide an experience for that individual that aligned better with their life, fewer in clinic visits, and also just a technology experience that was more on par with what anyone would expect from technology in the world we live in today. So our original kind of buyers and pharmaceutical partners really saw that it was about access and experience for patients. Now, in those settings, it wasn't 100% required because, the world wasn't shut down like it was in the pandemic. But the problem we were solving was a universal problem. Almost any drug that's in development really struggles from patient recruitment, patient access, and patient retention. Now, there are exceptions to that, but by and large, this is one of the core problems to solve in every clinical development program.
Fascinating. And so it was still a tenant and a need, even
Yes.
pre-pandemic, but then it became a requirement after. Uh,
Right.
you were spot on in predicting the trend of decentralized clinical trials and identifying the core need, which you just expressed of every trial struggles, every pharma company struggles to connect with patients, the right patients. Um, what are some of the next waves of innovations that you're seeing when it comes to clinical trials that you guys are focused on? I'm not asking to share your roadmap, but I'm just curious for trends that you're picking up on. And is this Gen AI, Open AI trend impacting clinical trials and the work that you guys do around there? What are you seeing next happen in the market?
Sure. I think that when I take a step back and I look at where are we in curing human disease, so no, for the last 10 to 15 years, the number of drugs approved per year has basically been the same. It's roughly anywhere between 35 and 50, but the average is in the high 40s. And it hasn't changed dramatically. So when you think about the fact there's over 10,000 suboptimally treated or uncured diseases, with that number of drugs approved a year, we're on a 200-year timeline to basically treat the majority of human illnesses. The other thing that I think is so exciting, but also highlights the challenge, is that the science, the foundational science of drug development, is at an all-time in an all-time best era, whether it's AI-driven drug development or just immuno-oncology, harnessing platforms that we already know work and enabling them in new therapeutic areas. The bottleneck is the inhuman testing. The bottleneck to curing human disease and taking it from 200 years to 20 years is basically we need to totally accelerate clinical development. And I think we could go from taking, basically 50 drugs approved a year to 500 if we could 10x the number of shots on goal. So whether it's Gen AI or some combination of all, a number of new technologies, what we need to be able to do is have more therapies entering the in-human testing. And we need to 10x the number of shots we're taking on goal. In order to do that, the cost needs to come down by a significant factor. The time required needs to come down dramatically. And I think we can get to 10x shots on goal. One of the things that excites me the most about how we achieve this goal is when you take a look at the drug label. Basically, the clinical trial is the drug safe and is it effective? We need to generate the data that understands and answers that question, and we need to do it faster and at lower cost. So things like digital twins, Gen AI for patient recruitment and patient selection and patient matching. And ultimately, the number of strategies that can get us to a faster answer for is the drug effective and is it safe, I think will enable that 10x shots on goal. But it's not going to be any one solution. What we need to do is take a look at the biggest drivers of time and cost and go after those problems hard. 90% of dollars in clinical development are still spent on human services.
Really?
We know that leverage from technology is dramatically underrepresented right now.
From your, that's a big vision, and I love that. From your experience as a physician and also working on the pharma side, are physicians still, are they thinking of clinical trials as like a treatment pathway now, or it's just like an afterthought from all the clinics and all your experience that you work with?
So in the challenge and problem around patient access is, the awareness of clinical trials and clinical trials as a care option. In oncology, it's definitively a part of patient care. But, for me, when I was practicing in dermatology, say at Stanford, many of my colleagues wouldn't even know what clinical trials I was running or what, or what clinical research I was running or what my colleagues' clinical trials they were running. So I think there is a broad awareness where in areas where it's not recognized as a core kind of moral and ethical responsibility of the physician to provide that option to the patient. And I do believe that this is changing fairly significantly, especially because the number of drugs in development on the biotech side for untreated illnesses before is really exciting for physicians. Like we're starting to see treatments for diseases we had not seen treatments for ever before. And that actually is a big driver of physician interest.
The That's good to know. I was actually very curious. Like I know in oncology, because if there's no other option and your life's on the line, you're going to
Right.
explore every possible avenue. If you dermatology could be tougher. You mentioned a really big vision for like how to move the needle on number of approved drugs per year, and it's a journey to get there. On the company building side, how do you create a culture where your team is constantly thinking about new innovation? It's bigger when you get harder, like new innovations, building new products to services. Like how do you build a internal culture where people think in those terms of think big, move the needle, and really make an impact still and build new innovative products?
It's such a great question. It's something I think about a lot because I don't know if you encounter this, but kind of the founder bias or, a bias of anyone is that you assume people around you think and operate the same way you do. So like I actually would categorize myself not as a CEO or as an entrepreneur, but as an inventor. Like that's how I see myself. So I love to invent things. And what I saw is we were really going through this hyper growth was kind of what you described, I think was more about iteration than invention. And what's been really exciting about the AI surge is that it's such an opportunity to go back to the team and say we have to be inventing. We have to be inventing every single day. So when the LLMs kind of really emerged, and it was very clear, I went deep on trying to learn how they worked and all of the technical aspects from a physician's lens, as not an engineer. And I gathered a core group in our company to take some really big shots on goal, like make some big bets, and to be able to come up with like kind of moonshot approaches to problems we were solving before. And fast forward a year, it's amazing the progress that we've made. So it highlighted for me, I think, a gap in my own leadership when we were in hyper growth, that I wasn't really emphasizing the invention culture, the like take big, like make big bets kind
Yeah.
of culture, and that we got into this mode of just hyper growth. But today, we were so inspired by the potential of AI that I think we've really started to establish that culture of invention that I would hope we had always had. I'm sure there's still a lot that we need to do to reinforce and build upon that.
Are you guys fully remote? Are you hybrid? Are you in office? What's the,
We have hubs, but by and large, it's a remote first company, even before the pandemic. So we kind of
oh,
embrace the decentralized concept. Also, in part because clinical trials, we deliver software in 115 different languages, and
wow.
we're operating in 70 different countries. So, we have to be able to be a very global team.
Maybe my question doesn't make sense now. Was there a big difference in hyper growth scaling during COVID compared to pre and after COVID? Because you were or remote first. Did you see a big difference during COVID?
I would say it wasn't really whether it was remote or not remote, but it was just the sheer percentage of growth. So one of my, insights as we exited the pandemic is there were times where I felt like we were playing 11-a-side soccer with like 18 people. And so I think that, as you grow, maybe even more so remotely, you can you can outgrow like how the company is currently operating and what the current company needs are. So I think we recalibrated with that in mind. And now I think we're playing 11-a-side soccer with 11 people and a really strong bench. But I would say that definitely when we were in the hyper growth phase, maybe in part because it was remote, I think that we developed a certain growth culture that didn't ultimately provide as much leverage as we say have today.
I feel like that's a story of many tech companies during the hyper
I
growth
think
stage.
so. It's a big learning for me as a CEO. I think constraints actually build a stronger company and a stronger team. And I think you need to really focus on leverage in every single player you have on your team, every single team member you have. And when you're growing so fast, I think you lose your sense of the leverage to a certain degree. I felt that that was, something where we're so strong today compared to where we were.
I have the same experience. You're like, man, I had like 10 people doing this, and this one person could do what these 10 people do.
Right. And the cool thing is, I think about organizational entropy a lot. Like entropy is so real. Disorder is real. And the smaller the team, the lower the entropy. Therefore, also to a certain degree, the higher the leverage because you just don't have as high of a tax on
Yeah.
the organization in achieving any single goal. So yeah, it's really interesting. I as we move forward, and certainly the times will shift back to hyper growth or growth at all costs. And I really just want to ensure we keep our eye on a team with extraordinary leverage, a business with extraordinary leverage.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of the principles that were shared with someone in your shoes or my shoes during hypergrowth during COVID are just like not true at all. And we were all told to do the same things. So you live and you learn though. So to close with some rapid fire round, if you could pick one word to describe your life as a CEO of Medable, what would it be?
Teamwork.
That's a good one. Uh, you were unbelievably successful, even before Medable, by the way, and with Medable. What was the number one personality trait of yours that made you who you are today?
Resilience. And I would say the other one, the double-edged sword, just being super hardworking.
Those are a good combination of traits. One word, what's the most enjoyable part about working on clinical trials and supporting clinical trials?
Moving the needle on human health and really accelerating the development of treatments for conditions that didn't exist before.
That's a good closing. That's great. Well, thank you, Michelle. Thank you for sharing the learnings and insights in founding story Medable, what you've built, the team you built, the company culture, the impact you're making in pharma companies, how you want to move the needle and number of launches per year and reduce costs and time on clinical trials. This was really great. I appreciate the time, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Ariel. It's such a pleasure to speak with you. And, cheers to you and the incredible things you've done as an entrepreneur. It's something that I really, really am inspired by.
Thank you for that. Cool. All right. Thanks, Michelle.